Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. You're welcome to the second anniversary of Lagos Environment Webinar Series. Happy Independence to Nigeria. Lovely panelists, thank you for joining us. It has been a very wonderful 2 years for the co-environment team, and thank God for the journey so far. Today we are discussing something that is crucial. Basically, everybody knows that in Nigeria, policy somersaults and policy cumbersome and different language has been used for policy in Nigeria. You see, because people have issues when it comes to policy from different governments, from different states, different policy comes up by different administration. There's always what we call policy inconsistency. But we cannot have that when it comes to environment, because environment is germane, environment is very, very important. Our life depends on how we manage the environment. So for any policy that will come up when it comes to environment, it has to be data-driven. And that is why today we are talking about environment policy that is based on data, that is based on scientific facts. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to Lagos Environment Lecture Series, the second anniversary webinar of Eco-Enviro Talk. Our dialogue for today is focusing on environmental evidence-based decision-making in environmental policy formulation in Lagos State. This topic seeks to test the hypothesis of the need to incorporate relevant environmental information when designing policy instruments, and also to strengthen the scientific infrastructure for evidence-based environmental policies. Just in case this is your first time joining the show, Eco-Enviro Talk is a platform created to bridge the knowledge gap between human development and sustainable development through science communication. One of our core aims is to plan, organize, and implement programs and projects for environmental management, conservation, and sustainable development. In the past year, we have designed 5 knowledge products: Lagos Environment Lecture Series, which has had 6 editions, Green Challenge, which has had 4 editions, Youth Video Competition, 2 editions, and short advocacy videos. A brief introduction about myself. I'm Wande Seriki, a sustainability and climate change professional, passionate about designing holistic pathways for green growth in Africa. One of the numerous ways I believe this can be done is by bridging the knowledge gap between human development and sustainable development, thereby creating opportunities for best available scenarios that can be adopted. It's my pleasure to be moderating this show, and I hope that you're ready for the conversation. It would be an absolute delight to meet you all. So please introduce yourselves in the chat box menu, your organization, your name, your organization, and any other thing that you'd like us to know about you. Thank you. As we all know, that evidence-based decision-making in policy is a critical approach that utilizes rigorous research and data analysis to inform policy decisions. However, we haven't seen that happening a lot here in developing countries. And this method really is to ensure that policies are grounded in solid evidences rather than personal opinions or political agendas. However, before we start the conversation, I'd like to share the agenda with us so that we understand, we have an idea of what this conversation is really about. We'd like to first say that we are proudly sponsored by 3 indigenous companies: Techno Oil, Gas Terminallion, and Bash Distinct Oil. So I want to say a huge thank you to our indigenous sponsors. And here is the agenda for today. So before I come up with the next thing on the agenda, I'd like to say that we should get ready with our phones because we have a free giveaway for you. Fastest fingers. Enjoy. Next on the agenda is, I would like to introduce the lead speaker for today, who is Dr. Timtope Shobamo. She's an environmental toxicologist with several years of experience in environmental and ecological risk assessment alongside pollution management. Her research focus is on the risk assessment and management of organic pollutants in various environmental media using classic and emerging ecotoxicology tools. This is with a view to develop and provide targeted environmental management advice to regulators and policymakers. She leads a project titled Evidence Used in Environmental Policymaking in Nigeria, UPIN, which has trained numerous environmental researchers, policymakers, and industry practitioners. It has given rise to a multidisciplinary research group titled Environmental Evidence Synthesis and Knowledge Translation, and an environmental evidence portal for Nigeria. Dr. Oshogbamu is an affiliate of the African Academy of Sciences, an advisory board member to One Health and Development Initiative, and an editorial board member of 4 international environmental journals, including Integrated Environmental Assessment and Management. She's an advocate of the United Nations SDG Goal 6, Clean Water and Sanitation, SDG Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and SDG Goal 13, Climate Action. She holds a PhD in environmental toxicology and pollution management and lectures at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. She's an ardent researcher with several referred journal articles, and she has supervised over 30 postgraduate research projects. You have the floor, ma'am. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. And for those of us who are joining from different parts of the world, good morning, good afternoon. And for those of us who are Nigerians or presently in Nigeria, happy Independence Day celebration. I'm very excited to be part of this event today. Mr. Lasisi and I have come around a few years and had an opportunity to work with the Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, as well as some of its agencies in the last few years. And it's quite apt that, he found me worthy to give the keynote presentation at this occasion today. First, I say congratulations to the team of ECO Enviro Talk. Mr. Lasisi in particular is a very proud, we're very proud of him at the European project. He's one of our inaugural trained participants, but also a partner in the European project. And we laud his initiatives in moving the issue of evidence-informed decision-making in environmental management and policy in Lagos State. I tweaked the title a bit, and I said I was going to inform Mr. Lasisi earlier on, but somehow I didn't get the time to do it. As he probably knows, I'm an advocate of evidence-informed decision-making, and I will speak to that in the course of my presentation. Being the founder of the Evidence Used in Environmental Policy Making in Nigeria project, and some of the other experiences I've had on the issue of science advice, evidence used in environmental policy making, I choose to work with the narrative of evidence-informed decision making. And I'm going to be speaking about evidence-informed decision making with respect to policy formulation and environmental decision making in Lagos State during the course of this lecture. I wear many caps, but I will share some of the caps that are relevant to this talk today. And I hope that we'll be able to share lessons and also experiences which will, move policy formulation and decision-making on environmental management in Lagos State in particular and globally forward in the course of this presentation. I'll be guided by this outline. I want to interrogate the word evidence-informed decision-making. And I'm going to be talking following that about, evidence-based versus evidence-informed decision-making. I was told that this is a lecture. So permit me, it might end up that it looks like I'm giving a lecture like the students, but I also understand that we have diversity of participants in this presentation today. So I would tone down on the lecture and make it a presentation, but I felt that it was important to give some clarifications or at least my own perspectives. And that's something I should say in the course of this presentation, that most of the thoughts that I'm sharing here are mainly my perspectives from the field, practically in working in this area, and also from my experiences with local and international experts on this issue of evidence-informed decision-making, some evidence-based decision-making, environmental science advice, and some experiences I've had also in the government sector, working on fellowships with the Federal Ministry of Environment and partnerships with government agencies. Then I will zero in on environmental policy in Lagos, talk about the policy formulation itself, the process, and share some of the initiatives that we've applied in the HUPIN project. And I'm going to be ending with a call to action. And I realize that this is streamed on YouTube Live. I would have loved that it was an opportunity where we could share ideas, but I will put forward my own thoughts about the call to action on evidence-informed policy making in environmental management in Lagos State. And on the course of the Q&A and the panel session, I believe that participants can, share ideas and also ask questions about this in the course of the presentation. So I want to start with some quotes that I've put together, and is, like I said, it's been largely based on my experience. One of the things in EIDM, at least in this part of the world, and is something that is fairly recent, is that it's often not something that is part of core curriculum, right? I mean, those who do anything near this are those who study public policy, those who are in law and all of that. I must say that I am an environmental toxicologist, and I specialize as well in pollution management. And so it's that aspect of pollution management that brought me into the space of EIDM or EIPM. And maybe permit me to give a bit of background. And some of us, particularly the younger ones or early careers who might be here, might actually try to, wonder how I came into this space. I'm not a lawyer by training. I'm not a policymaker by training. I'm not a politician by training, like I said. But one of the things that moved me here, beyond me teaching a course called Environmental Regulations and Standards at the postgraduate level at the University of Lagos, is that when I completed my PhD almost 10 years ago, I was interested in the impact of my research, right? I mean, you go through the circle, first degree, second degree, third degree, and you sort of attain the zenith, as it were, of academics in terms of reading and all of that. And, I published papers as well, published papers from my PhD. And I was like, okay, so what's next, right? By that time, I published maybe about 10 or 15 papers, and I was concerned about the impact of those papers that I published. I mean, for most of us, who are in academia, we talk about this issue of publish and perish, so if you want to remain relevant in the system in academia, you want to ensure that you publish, and we publish in journals, and we're encouraged to publish in high impact factor journals. But after doing all that, I was like, okay, so I've done that. What next? What's the intent or the overall purpose of the research that I've done, expending a significant portion of my life to, and expended money in conducting the research? And you understand the base in Nigeria, most of the time, our research are actually personally funded, except for some of us, who are a bit experienced in getting grants, and then we get grants to do research. And then, you also go through the rigors of writing up of papers, going through peer review, get them published. And maybe the best you get citations. But after that, what's the input of the research? And, when we come to environment, and I think Mr. Lasisi alluded to this earlier on, it's an applied course, it's an applied discipline, right? So what that means is that what you're learning, the skills that you get, is expected to be applied to solve something. And that was what I was concerned about. I was concerned about how is my research finding solving any environmental problem, right? I specialize in organic pollutants assessments and monitoring. We get the results out there. We put results about assessment and risk of different chemicals and substances in the environment. But what of use is that information, in the real world? And who are the people that are using it? And who are the people that are using it, but do they have access to what they need to inform their decision or policy? And it's not just about the policymakers alone. It's also about the practitioners, consultants, what informs their work, what informs their practice in improving the environment. As an environmental practitioner, as a government ministry or agency in the environment space, our overall aim and mandate is that we want to ensure the sustainability of the environment, the different environmental matrices. We want to ensure that we mitigate or we bring to the barest minimum the adverse impact of human activities. Mostly, we call them anthropogenic inputs on the environment, on animals, on plants, on even humans themselves, on the air that we breathe. And so it was that interrogation that I did personally that led me into what we call science advice and evidence-informed decision-making. And so I began to navigate that space and found out that there is a large lacune or gap between evidence producers, the researchers, and they are not only in the universities, they are also in research institutions, and the evidence users, which are really the policy makers, right? Those in the ministry, the decision makers, those in private institutions who are making decisions based on results of environmental analysis, especially that has to do with the inputs or the emissions from their own activities on the environment. And there is need for them to have that information so that they can fine-tune their processes. I mean, I've had opportunities to sit on panels as an expert on EIA reports, and Mr. Lasisi would, this is his area. And then part of what we do in that report is that we require the companies or the proponents to put mitigation measures in the report, to also have environmental monitoring plans. And all of these are supposed to be based on, data, that baseline data that they get from that environment in order to ensure that there is a mitigation. So why evidence-informed decision-making? So we talk about EIDM as the use of the best available scientific evidence. I must tell you that it is not all scientific evidence that is out there that is actually rigorous. I mean, the invitation letter is about, focusing on using rigorous, research and scientific evidence-informed decision-making. I mean, we all hear and perhaps know now about predatory journals and all of that. It's not all. So it means that there has to be a process of actually soliciting or retrieving or extracting the best available scientific evidence. But it's not only that that should inform decision-making or policy-making, especially with respect to environment. It also applies in health sciences, in education, and all of that, but we're talking about environment today. We must also consider this best available scientific evidence in contrast with contextual factors. What are these contextual factors? Those evidence that you apply within the framework of Lagos State and Nigeria, considering our, physical chemical attributes. So we are in the tropics now, and you want to implement a guideline or you want to implement a standard on substances that have, risk assessment have been done and these have potential harm on the environment. You cannot just adopt those standards that have been applied in temperate countries, because the physical variables and climatic conditions are different. And under these different conditions, these substances will act differently, more or less. And so those contextual factors are important to consider. Another contextual factor to consider is about the local economy itself, the people themselves. We cannot divorce environment from economy. We cannot divorce environment from socio-economic and socio-demographics. We cannot divorce environment from other variables that are important to ensure we have a sustainable environment that we require. And so those contextual factors are very important to consider. And all of those are not only found in scientific literature. So it means that you have to go through process of consulting with some informal groups and informal sectors, doing expert consultations, doing stakeholder consultations, doing public opinions and things like that. And so it is the consortium of those, in addition with this best available scientific evidence, that should guide decisions by policymakers. That's my own perspective on what EIDM is. And I say that EIDM matters. It matters a lot, especially within the context of Africa. And if truly by 2063 we want to achieve the Africa we want, we need to ensure that we mainstream this contextual evidence in addition or in concert with this best available scientific evidence. And we also need to facilitate and emphasize collaboration. Collaboration between evidence producers, and I said they are researchers, and the users, but also the brokers as well. People who actually facilitate the gap building or the gap closing between researchers and policymakers. And that's why I'm really grateful with what Eco-Enviro Talk is doing, because this is exactly what Eco-Enviro Talk is doing. Eco-Enviro Talk is facilitating that gap closing between researchers who stay within their ivory towers most of the time and speak to themselves most of the time in publication in journals. Maybe we do a bit well going to conferences, but most of the time we also talk to ourselves in conferences. And then the users themselves, the policymakers who are within the ministries and agencies, the private sector who are within their companies, the practitioners, the consultants, and also the various publics, in order to have informed decision making and achieve sustainable development. So those are my thoughts. And I felt that it was important to provide that background as we move ahead on this topic. So when we talk about evidence-informed management or environmental management in this case, we're basically integrating best available scientific information, right? So the data, right? And this data include both primary data as well as secondary data. And we're considering this in concert with expertise. We're also looking at local knowledge, indigenous knowledge. They're very, very important to consider and to mainstream in EIDM and in evidence-informed environmental management. And values, social values, very, very important. Values of the system or the socioeconomic group that we're dealing with and for which that environmental policy is directed to or will impact. They're very, very important in talking about this. And as I began to, research and prepare for this, I came across this infographic, and I'm just going to speak to certain parts of it, which basically depicts what I've just explained in the previous slides. It's important that evidence-informed policy making or decision making or policy formulation is done in concert with various stakeholders. Of course, the collectors, the evidence producers are key, but the evidence users are also very important. Once there is no synergy, once there is no meeting point between these two, and this also includes various publics, there will be a problem. The point is, we always talk about it in the course, environmental regulations and standards. When I throw it open to the students and our invited guests, we say there's a preponderance of environmental policy. In fact, the recent fellowship I just finished in Germany, where we had experts from all over the world, from different disciplines, we all agree that it's not only in Africa, even in other places, there's a preponderance of environmental policy. What we are concerned about is that, are these environmental policies impactful? Are they achieving their set goals and objectives? And if they're not, what are the issues? What are the challenges? And how can we make things better? And that's how EIDM has evolved in the area of environmental management, starting with the health sector. So there's a process. It's not something that you just happen upon. It goes through a process. And this process, whether we like it or not, takes time. And as you go through that process is owned, right? It is sharpened, with experience and with experiences from previous implementation of policies that have been formulated through this process. So there's a consistent and constant circle. And that circle means that there's some form of communication that is back and forth between the various stakeholders. So you gather the evidence, you synthesize them, you communicate them, right? You use them, but you also need to evaluate. And you need to carry on various partners in this process. And you also need to consider the context. One thing I always emphasize in this is that context is very key. What's going to work in Africa, especially in the area of environmental management, may not necessarily be what is working abroad. Our values are different. Our contexts are different. Our stage of development is different. And so we cannot bring what's happening over there and just, ham it on people and just expect them just conform. It doesn't happen like that. And that's why a lot of the time we don't achieve the intended impact, even when we put in so much resources, human resources, material resources. And that's why I'm very excited once again about what Environment Talk is doing. Part of that context and part of that partnership, part of that communication includes informing the various publics, continually, advocating, teaching, providing education on these issues. We shouldn't assume that people know. No, that's not true. We shouldn't assume that people know. And even when people know, we shouldn't assume that people actually want that thing to change. The issue of behavioral change and, risk-based perception is very, very important when we talk about environmental pollution management, especially in Nigeria and Lagos. And we know Lagos is very key. Once Lagos can get it right, most of the time we see that there's a cascade to other regions. And that's why I'm very happy that Lagos is leading, particularly in this area of environmental management and, various informed strategies to support and realize environmental pollution management in Lagos. Obviously, it's very important. Lagos is the largest metropolitan city in Africa, and with population nearing 24 million, this is almost the size of some several countries, even in Europe. So it's very important that Lagos State gets it right. So, like I mentioned, I just want to, provide some form of basis. And like I said, this is opinion because even in the literature, there's still the debate about evidence-based, evidence-informed. And I just put this here. Evidence-based, you're looking at scientific evidence a lot of the time. But when we talk about informed, you have to consider those other things. Of course, as a scientist, I would love that the decision, the policy is only based on the data alone, nothing else. I would love that you do that. But you see, those data that we even collected were not collected in isolation. They were collected within complex socio-ecological systems, which must be considered. The fact that we generate data based on rigorous process and we say plastic is an issue, it's causing this impact, whatever, let's just land and stop it. It doesn't work like that because there's sort of other socio-ecological factors that must be considered. Political factors is also very, very important. I think in the introduction, Mr. Lasisi talked about, political and all of that. Political will is very key. And I must say again that this is not only a challenge for us in Nigeria or in Africa. This is a global thing. One, there is no political will, it is a challenge. And I'm sure we all probably remember the issue of, climate change policy and all of that at the time of the administration of President Trump. Once America, pulled out of that process, we know how challenging it was to get their support back. So political will is very, very important. Resources, lobbies, community needs, values, preferences, all these also contextual are very, very important to engage and to interrogate and to collaborate with when we're having evidence-informed policy formulation and decision-making in the area of environmental management. So we've been talking about policy. What is it about? Like I said, I'm not an expert in law, but because of my experiences and my teaching in this area, environmental policy may be thought of as the causes of action. And please note that it is not one action. The causes of action. And it could also be inaction. And so it also interrogates an ongoing process of interaction. It's not something that is done once and is just left like that. Some of us in this space may know that, particularly since 2020, a lot of the environmental policies and regulations in Nigeria at state and federal levels have been undergoing review. That's one of the points with policies. They are not things that are constant. They are set for a certain period and they must be reviewed. And in the reviewing, it means that the process needs to be interrogated again. And one of the key inputs for that is evaluation of the previous policy. What are the things we got wrong? What are the things that didn't work? How can we address it? So it's an ongoing process of interaction. And this interaction is not only between the policymakers alone. It's not only between the evidence users alone. it also must involve and incorporate the evidence producers. It must also incorporate the brokers, the NGO, the civil societies, the various publics, the end users, the market woman, the child, the youth. It must incorporate these various social demographics in order to have something that is truly evidence informed. And it comes out with a discrete product, or it could be an output, and is underpinned by the political system. If the policy is set up, designed, and formulated, by the ministry, if there is no sanction or approval from the government, from the executive, going to the judicial, it's not going to work. There will be no penalty, there will be no backing. And so you cannot hold someone, penable if it has not gone through approval through those processes. And so it becomes policy when it has gone through and it's written down through this legal context. And like I said, it's a very complex situation. Reciprocal links. In fact, it's so complex that it can become quite burdensome, right? And that's why it's important that skills are owned, particularly the persons that are responsible and involved in the formulation of the policies themselves. And is a reciprocal link, right, between society, between economy, between environment, and it's unique among other different types of policies. It's unique, especially when we talk about environmental policy. It's unique from educational policy. It's unique from health policy, because with the environment is one of those type of policies that navigates all those different sectors. For instance, we cannot talk about a sustainable environment without talking about education. We cannot talk about a sustainable environment and a good implementable environmental policy without talking about the health outcomes of the people that it's going to affect. We cannot talk about a sustainable environment without talking about the orientation and the behavior of the people. And so environment is one of those policies or one of those areas that is quite wide encompassing because it affects us. Remember that we said that when we are talking about the environment, we are talking about those things that are adverse impact from our own activities as humans. From human activities, most of the issues that we have with environmental problems are those that have emanated from man's quest to develop, from man's quest to utilize the resources in nature. But it's now gotten to a point where it has surpassed the capacity of nature itself to rejuvenate. And that's why we have environmental pollution. And so in order to redress or mitigate those actions, those different socio-ecological processes and drivers and factors and contexts must be interrogated, and there must be continuous reciprocal links between these ones. So environmental policy in Lagos State, I've just taken one. This is one of the most recent, if not the most recent. And I remember then that it took quite a lot of, they did quite a number of stakeholder engagement, but I wasn't involved in all the processes, so I don't know how robust or rigorous it is. But this is the Lagos State Environmental Protection Law, came out in 2017. And I just, did a screenshot here of the first page of that law. And we can see it says, this is a law that consolidates all laws relating to environment. Why? For the management, for the protection, for sustainable development of the environment in Lagos and for connected purposes. We're talking about evidence-informed environmental policy formulation in Lagos. To arrive at this situation, and not just arriving there because we now have the policy, we now have the law, going forward in the implementation and especially in achieving the objects. And if you read the document, quite detailed, it talks about the stakeholders, it talks about the objectives of the law, it talks about the different roles and mandates of the different agencies and different publics, that will enable the positive implementation or realization of this law. And so I'm going to talk about that process of achieving the positive realization, starting with the formulation process in the next few slides of this presentation. And I want to start with just a framework on an example that I adapted from China on, different types of environmental policies. Now, in environment or in environmental pollution management, we always emphasize the precautionary approach. And the reason why is that it's better that you stop the potential adverse impact of that, potential polluting activity before the impact is realized, because the costs, the resources, and the impact after the pollution event has happened is often very high. Not only that, most of the time, the environment itself may not be able to rejuvenate back to the original status. So in environmental pollution management, we emphasize a precautionary approach. So using the scale from this article from China, they talked about prior to environmental behavior. This is talking of framing within the context of, enterprises or institutions. We have, prior to that environmental adverse impact happening, what are those preventive policies that can be in place? And what are typical examples of environmental policies that are in place? And we have quite a number of them in Lagos. We have environmental planning policies. We have environmental impact assessment, which is a type of study that is required and mandated by law to be done before a project is started, not only in Lagos, but also in Nigeria and various parts of the world. And the essence of that is to ensure that there is a drastic mitigation or reduction of the potential environmental impacts, adverse impacts of the activities from that organization or that enterprise. That's the essence of EIA. So it's a type of environmental policy. And so we also have other policies that are like environmental quality standards. We have standards for water quality, for instance, and this even is different. We have drinking water quality standards. We have surface water quality standards. We have ambient air quality standards in outdoors. We also have indoor air quality standards. We have quality standards for soil or land. For instance, quality standards for agricultural environment, even quality standards for industry before they discharge their emissions or effluents into the environment. All these are different types of environmental policies, of which Lagos has. And why are these there? Like I said, this type of policies is to prevent the harm from happening in the first place. The question you want to ask is, in spite of these different types of policy, do they actually prevent the harm from happening? Is Lagos, or even in this case, this country, China, that has all these different policies, are they better off with that policy? Well, you know the answer. But the point is, imagine if that policy was not even there in the first place. We all probably remember, and in case we don't, let me just talk about how the issue of environmental management in Nigeria even started about. It actually started with a very unfortunate incident in Koko area of former Bendel State, right? And it was as a realization of the impact of that, not only on the environment, on the farmland, where those hazardous waste was discharged by this international company, right? By, the ship that discharged the hazardous waste. It was actually what even caused the uproar. And that people now, started, making a case for the issue of environmental protection. And then we now have the Federal Environmental Protection Agency coming up, was that people started experiencing, adverse health effects. People died. I think some people died. People, were having children that had, abnormalities, different kind of things. And by the time people began to trace where is this coming from and all of that, they realized that it was as a result of this toxic waste that was discharged on that land. And that's how FEPA came about. And we know the story. Transformed to Ministry of Environment, we have nursery, and then we have the different agencies, and this cascaded to state environmental. And I tell my students, I said, yeah? Yes. So, are you trying to get my attention? How many minutes? I don't know if you're trying to tell me the time I have.
No, you can go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Yes. So the point is, if these precautionary environmental policies are not there, imagine the case of the Cocoa incident. It means that, in fact, we may not even have the world that we have now. So it means that with these policies in place, we're a bit better off, but there's still more to do. And that's why we have different types of policies as well. Obviously, there's still more to do because now, in recent times, we are battling with emerging pollutants that we did not have or hear about 20 years ago. For instance, plastics, pharmaceuticals. We are battling with climate change, which, as we know it, is anthropogenic driven, is human driven as a result of emissions. Right. All of these are actually onslaughts of the impact of some of these precautionary policies that are not capturing the whole suite of potential environmental harms that can happen. And so we now have some policies that is aimed at controlling environmental behavior, that is aimed at controlling or mitigating already established or being experienced environmental pollution incidents. And some of them are economic based, some of them are also policies that are based on changing behavior. For instance, in China, in this case, we have things like different ISO certification. We also have it in Nigeria. We have ISO 14,000 environment management system. We have, quality management system. We also have tax systems. We have emissions trading. We have, environmental rewards. Like, for instance, an example is the prizes that is being given by Eco-Environmental, to students. And I like the fact that they are even targeting not just, adults, but you are targeting the young people, because I call these young people the now generation, because these are the ones who need to even become more aware about their environment and the potential impact of their activities, so that that awareness and education carries forward into their adult life and also changes their behavior. And this is one thing that is being done. So this is an example of a policy or an initiative driven by civil society, for instance, that is up to change behavior. And we know that behavior is changing, right? Another one that is tailored at behavior changing is discharge permits, environmental on-site inspection, monitoring, supervision. This is a case of where these environmental regulators, go to industries, ensure that they are in compliance, with the standards that have been set to ensure that there is no potential adverse impact on the environment. And then we now have those policies that I've now talked about. The incident has happened. There is environmental damage. What are the things that we need to do to forestall future incidences? And we have different ones. And like I said, these are just an example of some from China, but we have relevant ones also in Lagos and in Nigeria. So what is policy formulation now in context of Lagos? Policy formulation has been described as the development of relevant, acceptable, proposed course of action for dealing with environmental problems. I want us to take note of relevant and acceptable. The fact that an environmental policy is instituted doesn't necessarily mean that it's acceptable. Then you want to ask, so what's the process of it being acceptable? You don't have a choice. Once the policy is there and there are penalties, once you are not in conformance and you are caught, you face a penalty. But the question is, once the person, the penable person, pays the penalty, what happens thereafter? The regulator doesn't live with the person. The regulator doesn't live or stay in the company 24/7. After the regulator has gone and the person has paid the penalty and the person is continuing, what is actually the confirmation? What is actually going to ascertain that the person will change that behavior? And so it's important that stakeholders are involved, because if they are not involved, we will just be going around the circle. Once you have moved away, they're going on. Just imagine a child and a parent. The parent says, don't touch this fire. If you touch it, it's going to hurt you. And because I don't want you to be hurt, if I see you going near there, I beat you. But once I don't explain the rationale behind don't touch the fire, that activity by that child will continue. And so I am not going to achieve my overall goal at the end of the day. And that's why it being acceptable is important. But the question is, can you actually have all the stakeholders accept it? No, but at least you can get consensus, right? And relevance is also important. Relevance here, we're talking about context. I explained earlier, you cannot just come and bring the policies from the global north or from a temperate region, for example, and just dump it on us here and just imagine that that's the way it works. The environment is different. The socioeconomic conditions are different. The economic level of economic development, even level of environmental awareness and education of the demographics are different. And so the behaviors will be different and the outcomes certainly will be different. And so in order not to ensure that you are, excessively wasting resources, because it's a lot of resources that goes into policy formulation. And at the end of the day, actually having them, being implemented, it's a lot. And so in order to ensure you have maximum impact of such policies, You want to ensure that they are relevant and acceptable. And these environmental problems I've explained earlier are due to human activities. Our discharges into the various environmental matrices. And the policy process is complex. This is just an example, but my purpose here is to talk about policy formulation. And we can see that in the circle, policy formulation, and this is not necessarily, like I said, these things can be going pari passu. It's not necessary that they will go through these various things. Can be going pari passu. But the first thing is that there must be an agenda. There must be a priority. What is the issue? The policy itself must come up as a result of an issue that you are trying to address. We are trying to address the issue of plastic. That's the problem that we're experiencing. We have preponderance of plastic in our environment. That is the agenda. We now want to come up with a policy to deal with that issue, to deal with that environmental problem. Now, what is that process of formulation? And it's quite complex, but I just want to use this simple figure. It involves strategic thinking and then go through to the development of a policy. Start with the idea of the problem. And that idea will be brought about by different things. It can be something new, entirely anticipated, and you want to set up a policy before there's an issue. It can be something that is as a result of uproar, like we had the Popo incident in 1988 thereabouts, right? It can also be something that has emerged as a result of goings on globally. And before it becomes a serious problem at the local level, you want to tackle it. So the problem itself, the problem identification itself can come through various things. And it can even come through stakeholder consultation. That's why I said in environmental policies, it's reciprocal, continuous communication. Those who are on the front line of researchers, we want to be communicating with them such that when you begin to see that an issue is preponderant, you're finding you call the attention of the evidence users, you call the attention of the policymakers so that we can begin to look into it. And then you come through the next thing after you have identified the problem, you understand your context. And I like what Lagos State did. I was opportune to be involved at some point in the evolution or development of the Lagos State plastic policy. I think that was in 2018 or 19. No, I beg your pardon, 2020, 2021, thereabouts. Understand the context. And I remember then the PS then, and Mr. Lasisi was there. Had invited me to give a talk somewhere around the lagoon on, the states of plastic pollution and all of that. And she had challenged me and said, can you please give us information, right? Scientific evidence on the status of plastic pollution in Lagos. And that singular challenge or question, I put it to my students, master students, we began to work on it. And we did a rapid systematic review on, plastic pollution in Nigeria. And we identified what were the issues, we identified the states, and then we also identified some policy gaps and research gaps. Those things are very, very important because that challenge of that question helped us to ask the question about the context. Prior to that challenge, there had been issues and publications about plastic globally and even across Africa. But it was a case that the ministry wanted to understand what is the actual evidence base, what is the actual information on the status of plastic, beyond just the fact that we are seeing it physically around. Are there any effects that we're seeing? Are they actually getting into the food chain? Are they actually being transferred? Those are the different questions that can be answered and which actually involves different stakeholders for that. And what are the outcomes after you have understood the context? And like I said, the context alone is not just the scientific data. Thereafter, there were several stakeholder engagements, informal groups with industries that produce plastic, with organizations that were involved in the plastic recycling value chain. Different stakeholders were consulted. Very, very important in order to understand the context, the perceptions, right? The perceptions and the ideas of these different stakeholders, because these are the stakeholders or the end users or various publics that this policy will impact. And if you truly want to achieve a behavioral change and a positive implementation of the policy, you need to carry them along from the beginning. So after the outcomes, then we now have the policy options. Okay, what are the options we have? Should we have this option? A policy option is, should we just ban the plastic and say, see, this thing is a problem, let's just ban it. You want to look at the consequences of that policy option before you take it. So it goes through several weighting. If we ban it, who are the people it will impact? Is it going to impoverish people more? In impoverishing people more, are we going to have even more of that problem than less of it? And then after you have looked at the various options and going through different weightings to make a decision, then there is now consensus consultation. Consult the experts, go back to the experts as well. These are the options, these are the different weightings. How do we go about it? And then you arrive at a submission and then recommendation is made. So this is the sort of summary of circle of policy formulation process. And I'll run through this. I don't think please, how many more minutes do I have?
In about 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. All right, thank you very much. Right, and so this is an example of what I just explained in the previous slide. You can see that it's a bit complex, but really it's something that this is just an expansion of what I just explained in the policy formulation process. We identify the issue, right? We analyze it. How? We analyze it by engaging different stakeholders, research teams, policymakers, different users, people in industry, different publics, collect secondary data. We also address socio-ecological issues, including adverse health outcomes. And then we now look at the policies as well. Because before you even come up with a policy, you also want to check, do we actually have some policies in place that may address this issue? Or what are the gaps in the policies that are already in place that is not addressing this issue? And how do we fill in that gap? So these are the different things you want to identify in the problem process. And then you go through the process of, understanding context, collecting the evidence, reviewing the evidence, doing consultation, evaluating it, and then submission when it goes through to the point of acceptance, then implementation. And as we go through this, it's not just stop at acceptance. The implementation process, the evaluation process, all involve reciprocal and continuous engagement with the stakeholders and collecting the data. That after the policies have gone through the relevant, rigorous process, is it achieving the aim of the policy itself? And the policy will usually have a lifetime. So much so that maybe in another 5 or 10 years, we review it. As the policy achieved its purpose, do we need to stop it or do we need to review it? Are there any other issues that have come out or come about as the result of this policy? These are the different issues that can come through or come about in the policy process. In working with Lagos State in the ILPIM project, Evidence Use in Environmental Policy Making, one of the things we set out to ab initio was to work in tandem with relevant government institutions and partners. And the Lagos State Ministry of Environment was one of the key partners that we started with, following my fellowship at the Ministry of Science and Technology. And of course, we also involved Federal Ministry of Environment. And in implementing that project, which was basically aimed at capacity building to bridge the gap between researchers and policymakers, we developed what we call knowledge translation units. And at the Lagos State Ministry of Environment, we have one. But the challenge, I'm going to talk about it when we're talking about call to action, is where are we now since 2020 when we set up that knowledge translation unit? Are the units achieving its purpose? Are they still engaging? Is there any engagement going on at all? Are we actually having some initiations or some actions that are coming about as a result of that capacity building and training? Like I said, environmental policy, its implementation, environmental management involves continual process of learning, adapting, learning from experiences, implementing it, checking lessons learned, and moving on. And that's one of the beautiful fruits that we have from the European project with what Mr. Lasisi is doing, Environmental. One thing I've realized in this process is that there is a need for interest and passion on the part of the different stakeholders that are involved in the environmental management process. And one of the things that I've seen, especially with Lagos State, and I'm not saying this at the expense of others because other people, states are also trying in their own way. And of course, the resources available to Lagos State cannot be compared. This is part of the context that I'm talking about, is that there is a deep interest and passion to elicit and bring about the change that we need. That is that passion that is important. Just that it started with my own passion and my inquiry about why, after I've done my PhD published, I'm not comfortable with the fact that my research is not making any change. It's not changing behavior. Is seemingly not having any impact. And that's why I got into the space. And I believe that's what informed Eco-Environment, that there's been a lot of several policies in Lagos State, a lot of implementation, penalties and all that, but it looks like there is no change. It looks like the change is marginal. And that's why environmental education, environmental awareness, catching them young, going through clubs in school, having essays and competition to get people to think, young people, old people, industries, to get them to get on this bandwagon, to get them to show interest, right? To show interest in this because it is all for the sustainability of the environment for us all. One thing I teach in my classes is that the environment is such that it's not only your own. Whatever you do in your compound, believe you me, once it has to do with the environment, it can affect the person living in Ketu. There was a recent fire incident in Ilupeju, and I just noticed the place yesterday. But as far as I think Unilag or even Obanikoro, we were seeing the smoke emanating there. And you can imagine, for those of us who are in air pollution, you can imagine how if the smoke was affecting those of us as far away as Obanikoro, and some people were seeing it from very far ends. People living within that local environment, you can imagine some of them will probably not even be able to sleep in their houses on that day. Because the effect, even after the burning must have been put under control, will continue within that local climate. This is the effect. The thing happened just in one premises, but you can imagine the potential impact of some people. Some of the people who are vulnerable, that have health issues relating to air and all of that, likely they probably would have ended up in hospital, or if they quickly knew how the situation started, they quickly leave the area. This is what environment can do, and so it's very important. So we have knowledge translation units that we did. We also, in order to support Lagos State and different regulation agencies, we set up another initiative that is called Environmental Evidence Synthesis and Knowledge Translation. And what that does is that we want to support in generating the evidence itself. Now, like I said, it is support, because this evidence itself, we generate it, we publish it. But the work of the synthesis and translation is something that should be done by the government, by the ministry, by the policy formulators, in concert or in collaboration with the research producers, with the evidence producers. This is actually being done in some other countries, especially in the health sector. How do we empower and encourage? Because what we have identified is that there is interest, but then there is a skills gap. We have introduced the knowledge, we have bridged the gap, we have brought them together, the producers and the users. How do we take it to the next level to increase capacity, to expand capacity to be able to do this work of synthesis? Because like I said, this process is not as simple as it is. And so in order to further support that, we went ahead to come up with what we call the Environmental Evidence Portal for Nigeria. We all know that if you want to get any information on the environment or even environmental pollution, and you want to get contextual information, you type in your information into Google and you get thousands, hundreds of thousands of information. And you don't have more time. Policymakers are very busy people. How do I quickly skim through the milieu of information in order to get what I need, which is also best available scientific evidence to help me while I'm actually trying to come up with the priorities and the status on the issue. So we developed this and we call it a one-stop shop. It is still at the stage where we have just developed it. Challenges that we have is, expanding this, with funding. And what this does is that it provides information relevant to Nigeria alone. And if you go through the system, you can actually decipher and we can click a button that limits the information you get for Lagos State. And we are doing this not only as producers, we are working in partnership with Lagos State Ministry of Environment and its partners and other environmental ministries at federal levels to context and to synthesize this environmental information in one place. And I want to end on this note, and I would like to speak to this and not just speak for my slide in terms of the call to action. And some of the call to actions, I've talked about them in the course of my presentation. Whether we like it or not, as in other sectors, environmental pollution management, policy formulation requires resources. And some of those resources are funding. One of the things, there are several funding, but we know that there's paucity of funding for research and for this kind of knowledge to action, knowledge exchange, knowledge translation, knowledge synthesis for the purpose of policy formulation, but also for the purpose of evidence-informed environmental management. In Nigeria, it is low. And the challenges are multiple. But one of the things is that we must bring it to the fore, why we need this. I think that's one thing that is still missing. Why do we need funding specifically for evidence synthesis? Why do we need funding and capacity building for environmental regulations, for environmental policy makers to be able to synthesize information, to be able to, communicate it and translate that knowledge into the forms where they can use it for environmental education, where they can use it to engage various publics, where they can use it to have robust consensus and stakeholder engagement. Capacity building is very important and it costs money. It costs money to engage facilitators. It costs money to make this sustainable, not just a one-time thing. It costs money to continue that reciprocal interrogation of the relationship and reciprocal capacities between the user, the producers, and the brokers themselves to be able to achieve an evidence-informed environmental management. These are just some of the thoughts that I've put together to share. In the next panel session, I've been given a list of questions and I'll be able to throw more light about this at that point. I believe my time is up. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That's a lot of information to take down all at once. Definitely, I like how you brought your passion to this. It definitely did show while you were presenting. I want to say thank you so much. And particularly for me, what struck me the most was the fact that you started to explain that even after going through 3 tiers of education level, you still were questioning what is my why? Why am I still doing this? And that for me was very profound because yes, that is one of, and I really like you mentioned that that's really why Eco-Environmental was established, because we realized that there's so much scientific research being done. However, we don't see it, it's not translating into anything. There's no real impact. Even when you meet professors, you're shocked at how much information they have, but it's and this is what we say, that the information is siloed, but we can begin to bridge this gap. And really, that's why we established Eco-Environmental. So I just want to say thank you so much for bringing your passion to board. Like, for me, it was really so much information that you put out there, and I was definitely taking notes. So I just want to say thank you again. As a quick recap on my end, as I mentioned, your impact of your research to public, that was very important for me, and that was one of the first things that struck me from your presentation. How environmental evidence is impactful. That's also another thing that we need to show. Those are the things that we need to begin to show. Environmental evidence, what is the impact? How do we even show the interdependencies or what is happening from a particular environmental space and how you impact another environmental space. So that's something that we also need to think about. In terms of evaluating, contextualizing values and stages of various development, that's very important for us to understand at the initial stage of designing policies. One of the questions that struck me while you were doing this was when you mentioned the skills gap, and I think I want to throw a question to you while I'm still doing this recap, is interacting with students in academia, and you've so many students have passed through your hands, but yet you think that there's still a skills gap in synthesizing data. Do you think that this is something that we can begin to address from schools, and maybe we can begin to inculcate this skills gap in environmental curricula, so that this gap can also be met at the point so that we already even have experts who are able to address these issues? Because capacity was something that you were also you highlighted very much in your presentation. So maybe our curricula is still not addressing, it's still not closing a certain gap that we would like it to. So I just thought that maybe we can share that and I can continue with the recap. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I can answer this now.
Yes, ma'am, you can.
Okay. Yes. So when I was talking about the skills gap, I was actually talking on the part of the policymakers, right, in synthesizing the evidence. Now, we are able to synthesize the evidence. That's why that challenge was put to us, and we did systematic reviews. But truly, systematic reviews is not just the work of evidence producers, because we produce the evidence, right? We generate the evidence. But what you need to be able to make policy, or what the policymaker needs, the regulators need to be able to make the policy, is for them to be able to synthesize the information, get it to a form where it is utilizable by them. Now, there are different circles. The policymakers can do this. The research producers can do this. That the research themselves, the researchers themselves. But it's not all researchers that decide to specialize or do evidence synthesis, because evidence synthesis is a whole gap itself. And it's also part of what you're trained in, especially by the time you get, in fact, with your first degree, one of the first things you learn is how to do literature review. And that literature review is that you want to do a project, you want to know what is the state of the problem on the situation, and then you want to contribute to knowledge and extend the gap of that knowledge. Now, whether that literature review at that point is enough to be able to support, for instance, if a graduate from that program goes into the policymaking space and you're bringing that knowledge is there, you're able to do literature review. But that knowledge alone is not enough when it comes to being able to formulate the policy, because formulating policy and general evidence synthesis is beyond us doing literature review. And that's why you see when I explained earlier, I said systematic literature review. It means that it goes through a detailed process where you want to ensure that you curate all the available evidence. And then you also go through another level of appraising the evidence. Remember, I talked about best available scientific evidence that should be utilized in evidence decision making. So all of that needs increase in skills beyond what you get with a degree in a first degree alone, for instance, in environmental toxicology and pollution management. There are even people who go to school and specialize in evidence synthesis, get PhDs in evidence synthesis. But we are not saying, do we need PhDs in evidence synthesis on the part of policymakers for them to be able to formulate policies? No. And that's why there is need for them to cooperate and collaborate with evidence producers. But in collaborating themselves, you also need to know what is being done, so that when it is done and it's being done collaboratively, you are able to utilize the knowledge that has been synthesized for your use. For instance, if the policymakers are not, they don't understand the issue, there is no way they can pose the challenge or the question to the evidence producers to generate the question. And in understanding the issue themselves, they must have done some form of review of literature, review of the situation. Those are skills that need to be owned. It doesn't just come with getting the first degree, it needs to be owned. And that owning is the capacity building that we're talking about. And it's on both ends. So in the UPIN project, we don't train the policymakers alone, we train the researchers as well. And we also train the brokers, the CSOs as well. And we train them not only in ensuring interaction, but honing their skills in being able to do this to support each other. It's very important.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So just as a wrap up, we know that data is complex and it has different contexts. Also, it needs to be evaluated from the previous standpoint to where you're going. It must have an essence, and explaining the rationale to ensure that it also influences the right behavioral change that we expect these policies to see. So I just want to say thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your thoughts on this. Our viewers, we thank you for still staying tuned to us. Just before we move into the panel session, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Lasisi to say a word or two. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. It's a very wonderful lecture, and thank you for bringing out the need for evidence use in environmental policy formulation. And one thing that strikes me is the the gap between policymaker and researchers. And that's basically what people like in my field have been talking about. You see a lot of, I'll give an example. If you look at Lagos Lagoon, we have a lot of research on Lagos Lagoon, and you need paper, you want to do, as a policy maker, you want to do a review on studies that has been carried out on Lagos Lagoon. And the next thing you see, you can only find them in journals, in international journals. I was surprised that for me to do a review on what is happening on Lagos Lagoon, I have to subscribe to a journal in Canada, in New York, and some of the professional colleagues in academics said, last thing, it's not our fault. Publication is what researchers need, and you want to make your publication in journals that will give credit to your work. So, but with what we are doing, we are breaking the gap between the researchers and the policymaker, have the information available so that policymaker can use them and formulate policy very well. Thank you very much. We know that the journey of evidence in decision making is not straightforward. It takes a lot of process, and with this seminar and with this webinar, we know that some of our colleagues who are professionals, who are policymakers in the field of environment, will see the need why evidence-based is very, very important. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay, so we're moving right into the panel session. Dr. Shugamo is also part of the panel members, and I'd like to present to you Mrs. Sheol Adeyinka. She's a distinguished environmental and holistic wellness expert whose pioneering research is published in high-impact journals, encompasses pollution assessments, innovative work on green roof technology for climate change mitigation, and a dedication to promoting herbal wisdom and urban sustainability. With a deep commitment to interdisciplinary collaboration and community empowerment, Sheol's contribution extends from advancing environmental science to coaching individuals on wellness and advocating for green roofs. Also, as a visionary panelist on environmental talk shows, she continues to inspire and drive conversations addressing global issues, leaving an enduring legacy of sustainability, health, and environmental stewardship. You're welcome, ma'am. So, I'll be starting with Dr. Shugamo. I had a couple of questions that from your presentation earlier, and I think I want to start with, if you might please share a good example of an environmental policy that was informed by evidences that you are aware about. So a good case study that we could learn from as Lagos. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. I believe you're talking about examples of environmental policy in Lagos State.
Maybe not in Lagos.
Or generally?
Yes, generally.
Okay.
Good examples that we can definitely learn from.
Okay. So I wouldn't know if they're good now because I know about the policy, but I have not come through to the end of the cycle of the policy where evaluation is done to be able to appraise whether it's good. I mean, you can't know whether a policy is good until it comes to the point of evaluation to be able to see whether they achieve the objectives, right? But I can speak to some policies that I mentioned, at least one in the course of my presentation. For instance, the evolution of the Lagos State plastic policy. And I'm also going to try to be careful, and I'm saying it ahead, that I don't want to be biased because I was personally involved, at least in part of the process, right? I don't want to be biased that way. And so I wouldn't say that others that have evolved have also not go through such a robust process. But I felt that at that point I was involved in, it was a critical point that was important, the stakeholder engagement. And the point where I was requested by then the permanent secretary and the ministry itself to come up with contextual information on the status of plastic pollution in Lagos State, which I said at the time was one of the things that prompted me and my research, my postgraduate students, to do a rapid systematic review on the status of plastic pollution in Lagos State. And I must say that paper is one of, quite cited, was published in 2022, I believe. And it also prompted an invitation. So I was also opportune to be part of the National Metric Task Force on the National Action Plan for Plastics in Nigeria. It was something that was being done with the World Economic Forum and the Federal Ministry of the Environment. That was also a classic example for me because we were just two academic experts on the team, on that metric task force. And then we had industry stakeholders, people in the recycling plastic chain. We had government stakeholders from federal, states. I'm not sure if local was included. And I felt that that was, but one thing I told them at the time was I didn't see quite the informal sector, right? I didn't see the informal. We also had environmental practitioners. We had, I think, some CSOs, but one of the informal representative groups I felt were those that were missing. But I think that was quite a robust engagement because as we discussed and had several meetings, we realized that beyond just the data, which was some of the things that was requested for we that were academic experts on the team, we were also getting contextual information from the actual field practitioners. The recyclers were giving us information. And it will surprise you that beyond the data in academic and scientific publications, these industry tools also have data which they provided. And so it was a case of, is the data corroborating what we're having in literature? We call it, for instance, when you go to the field, we call it ground truthing. You want to be sure that what you've collected or what you have modeled is actually what is actually being experienced in the field. And through that conversation as well, we identified gaps in places where data was not collected. Some states where data was not collected, and so it will not be a total picture to just generalize based on data from Lagos and Abuja alone, for instance. So I think those are examples in the process of formulation. Now, to now evaluate how effective the policy will be, at the end of the cycle of that policy. And I don't think I've been in the process long enough to check, to be part of any, or rather to be, part of any in the evaluation to see whether those policies have truly been effective. But one of the indices is that the more robust the process is, and particularly the engagement, it will facilitate the relevance that I talked about earlier, and it will also facilitate the acceptability because key stakeholders were engaged. So those are some examples. And so the Lagos State one and this potential national one are some examples that I can speak to about. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, ma'am. I come to Mrs. Adeyinka now. I'd like to get your perspectives about how environmental evidences can help in balancing economic development with ecological sustainability. Where do these intersect and how can they help to achieve economic development? Thank you. You are muted, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And thank you, Dr. Shubham, for the presentation. It's like, I'm happy that I have people that I'm also thinking like them. They're already solving what I intended to solve. It's not enough to have research done. It is much more important for that research to answer the questions for which it was initiated in the first place. So I really appreciate your work. It's a job well done. So economic sustainability and economic growth at the same time, it's something that we can achieve. It's something that is determines true prosperity on a large scale. So I also want to appreciate what Eco-Enviro Talk is doing, bridging the gap between the researchers, the industries, and the government policymakers. I would like to point out something that Dr. Shubham talked about, something that she doesn't want to be biased about maybe disseminating a particular information. These are one of the challenges that we have as researchers. We have the data, we have the expertise, but we don't know how this information is going to be accepted, how it's going to be reviewed, how it's going to be evaluated. And even if it is accepted, evaluated, is it going to be implemented? Yeah, we know how we can be in Nigeria, but here in the US, it is even the policymakers that are actually trying to insensitize the researchers to carry out this research in terms of funds. Funds are more than available if you want to do anything that will enhance climate sustainability, which is one of the challenges that Dr. Shubamu pointed out, that the funding is not available, but here it is available. They are ready to support you. They are ready to evaluate with an unbiased mind without being judgmental of the outcome of your research. And you have nothing to fear if the outcome of your research is going to be accepted or not. I think that is one of the things that is actually impeding evidence-informed decision of environmental policies in Nigeria. So if those things can actually be worked on, I believe Nigeria has the expertise, the skills, the knowledge, enough data, enough data and information we have to bridge all this gap and to come up with sustainable policies that will make our environment a safer and a better place to be. So I think our policymakers has much work to do. Then I'm also of the opinion, I'm not sure if I should be asking this right now. I'm also of the opinion, do we need the researchers to meet the policymakers, or the policymakers should meet the researchers, or is there a party that should bring both of them together, or who goes to who first? I think for me, as a PhD student, I am kind of having that friction, because sometimes when I reach out to some government agencies asking for data on a particular research, I sense some reluctance, and I am the researcher and I am reaching out. I want to solve this problem, but I realize that they are holding back, They won't tell me no abstractly, but they give me excuses that, okay, yeah, the data is not yet complete, it's not yet this, but I want to solve that problem. So I don't know if I should be asking this right now, because I'm also a member of the, should the researchers come to the policymakers, or should the policymakers come to the researchers, or who brings them together? Should the entrepreneurs, the people in the industries bring them together, or I don't know who should do that, because the main goal, the ultimate goal, is to make sure that our environment is sustainable. If, for instance, there's global warming and the whole earth melts, both the researcher, the policymakers, the industries will be nowhere to be found. So I think there should be a kind of synergy between these practices, because it all determines our whole reason for existence, our how we, for posterity, for posterity, what happens to them. We might not be having the greater impact of environmental pollution presently, especially in Nigeria. It is much worse here in the US. There's flooding in New York. Temperatures are really rising, really bad. But in Nigeria, we don't really have much of those impacts now. But should we wait until we have those impacts before we come to a consensus and say, look, I'm not going after you in any way. I just want this to be good for our children, our children's children in the next generation. So I think these are the scores we need to settle first before we now say, okay, what should we do collectively? I don't know if Dr. Shukwamu wants to answer that. Yeah. So I will answer the question.
You want me to? Maybe the moderator can guide.
Okay. Yeah, please.
If I should answer that.
Doctor, before you speak, there's a challenge I see around, and I tell most of the researchers and people in the academics, while forming your research paper, while forming the paper, try to meet with the government agency, not when you want to administer the questionnaire. At the concept of your research, meet with the government agency, sit with them, let them know, I want to do this. Let them be part of your research design from the beginning. So when you want to administer the questionnaire, or you want to carry out, you want information, they will have been part of it from the beginning. And I think we are now developing that now. Most of the students come around, I want to work on this topic. If you want to work on this topic, can you tune in to this? Because if you tune in, it will help us to make the information available. So I think that's one of the major things that the challenge that we are having. And if we continue with that, the researchers at the conception stage of the research, if government agency, policymakers get feedback from it, it will make everything robust, and the ability that, okay, data are not available, the door will be open. I think that if we use that will work some of the solutions there. Thank you. That's just my contribution. Doctor, you.
Okay, yes. I mean, like I said, I'm always very proud of Mr. Lasisi. He just, champions what we do or what we've started with the Open Project. And it is just so true. But I also want to say, coming now from the point of view of a research producer, that is not always the case. I mean, like I said, one thing that stands out Mr. Lasisi and his initiative is that he's passionate and he has interest, but it's not all the regulators and policymakers who have it. But one thing that I've learned from experience is trust building. It's very fundamental. I mean, you want to get data from somebody, you just walk into the place, there is no history, there's nothing. The fact that you say you want to do your research and you need data doesn't mean that they should release the data to you. Right. So you want to, first of all, build a relationship. I mean, when you come to diplomacy and all of that, it's all about relationship building. I mean, even in my own space, I did not start out like that. I started out with building relationships. Let them actually feel and see that you actually have interest. And like Mr. Lasisi said, what problem are you trying to solve? If your own interest is just to collect that data to get a PhD, and then you are not helping them, why should I give the data to you? Especially if you are not paying me. What value are you going to bring to me for providing that data? Am I saying that should always be the case? But this is reality. If you truly want to solve problems in society, you want to bring them on board from the conception. I mean, Mr. Lasisi and I have done quite a number of studies. We've published, I think, 1 or 2 articles together. But it didn't start out like that. I've been researching for over 20 years, but I only started involving him in my work in the last 5 years. There was a period of trust building. We first of all met on the field while doing EIE and all of that, and then that synergy happened. Now, when my research students come, I send them to the relevant people. For instance, I had an engagement with a local government recently, and then we wanted to take the research forward, and then I went back to them. And the person was like, whatever. And I said, well, my student had been here last year, and you guys were the one that supported her. You went to the field with her. And the door was immediately opened for me, even to the chairman. And then the HOD of the Environment Department was telling, that, this work was actually based on, the MSc thesis that have been done with our support. We followed that to the committee and all of that. And we were very happy to partner. But that was a process of building relationship. That local government facilitated my meeting with the ballet. I didn't even know that there was a ballet there, and the several people that I needed to meet to discuss that project. So trust building is very, very key. And then what value are you bringing to the table? When I go to the students, I have another one that is doing a work on outdoor air pollution in Lagos. And at the beginning, he had to engage with Lamata and all of that. It's the same question. What value are you bringing? Are we going to share the data, with us, or we have to pay through a back wall like Mr. Lasisi to get? And I said, well, one of the very first things is that once you support us as a partner, at least a copy of the thesis can be made available to you after we are published, and we carry you along. Another thing researchers can do is that you can do a synthesis of your outputs or your results and let them have it. They will know this is the value that they get from partnering with you. When you come back next time, you don't need to, speak too much English, because they know that you're going to bring value that will help them. So it's reciprocal, like we said earlier. You are adding value to help their work, and they are also helping you, and both of you are helping to support the achievements of environmental sustainability. Yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Adenika, for your questions and your insights on the question asked. Just as a follow-up, I just wanted to say that in managing relationships, I mean, Doctor has clearly highlighted that researchers have to be creative in how they manage their relationships. But beyond that, how do you even begin that process? Imagine that you know nobody in that space. And I kind of feel like that's the challenge that Mr. Adeyinka is having. But beyond that, I also want to ask that.
Thank you sorry for cutting you, not me in particular, because I was able to mediate a particular situation. That was where I discovered that challenge. Before I left Nigeria, I was working at an agency, and I knew one of my professors that would be very instrumental to solving a particular challenge we were having in our agency. So I reached out to him as a staff on a personal relationship basis. I reached out to him. I said, Prof, we need this thing in our agency, and I know you can do this thing. Please just reach out, apply. Don't even tell them I told you about this. And at first, it was like, these agencies are supposed to be coming to us researchers to solve this challenge for them. We have the data, we've done the research. And I was like, Prof, put that aside first. Reach out to these people, apply. And he did. And I was so grateful to God that even up till now, the relationship, it has gone so robust. He has met so many other agencies and he's doing so well. It has even publicized his research group. And so I was thinking, if I were not there to communicate that opportunity to him, is there like a platform that can connect these two bodies together, the researchers and the policymakers? Because the policymakers, whether we like it or not, are members of these government agencies, top directors, and they formulate the boards that constitute this policymaking process. So if I was not there to mediate that process, is there like a platform that Dr. Shogbamu and Eco-Enviro Talk can come up with to unite these entities together? So that was why I posed that question to her, not me in principle.
Okay, so I will answer the two questions. I will answer the one by Mrs. Adeyinka and the one posed by the moderator on how do you start the synergy? You are green in the field. You don't know anybody. Where do you start from? Yes. Let me start with my own experience. I like to share real life experience because this is what has worked for me. When I finished in fact, for my BSc, right, my work was on crude oil spillage and the use of dispersants. And there, I used to engage a lot with the public, and I discovered DPR, then Department of Petroleum Resources. And I told my supervisor, I said, I'm working on a research project that is relevant to what they do. I would like to submit a copy of my thesis to them after I finish. And I did that. I submitted it to the DPR library. So I established that link right from my BSc, right? So that's why I talked about interest and passion of the person themselves. I already knew what I wanted and I knew where my research fits in. All these environmental agencies are online, they're available. You want to work on a subject. Who are the people that are in this space? Let me go and give another example with my MSc, and I think I'm answering both questions. After I finished my MSc, I wanted to gain field experience, not just theoretical. I used to attend then the ECO Climate Change Summit, then held at ECO Hotel every year. I used to attend. When I attend, I don't just sit down. I identify the keynote speakers, I go to the stand, and that's how I met then Multiple Development Services, Dr. Eugene Itwa. Anyone who's an environmental consultant in Nigeria will know him. That's how I met him. I was a student. I just finished, or I was in the process of finishing my MS, and I told him, I was interested in environment. I was a budding whatever. I wanted to, and that I would like to intern in his organization for free. And I interned there for 6 months. I was being paid on a part-time basis, and I was going to the field. I was meeting people. I was meeting environmental regulators at Lagos state level, at federal level. I was meeting them, and I wasn't shy. So one other thing is that you have to be bold. I was a student then. I wasn't an expert then, but I was a student, and I was willing to learn, and I allowed myself to be teachable. And so that way I was increasing my network, getting relevant contacts. Of course, by the time I was doing PhD and finishing, some of them already knew me. I also leveraged the network of my supervisors, very important. You mentioned already the professor that you know and all of that. A student that is doing a research, obviously whoever is supervising is an expert in that area most of the time. Leverage the person's network. Now, I know that it's not all supervisors that have that social capital, but especially in the environment space, they will have something that you can leverage. Find out, leverage it, get them to give you a letter of introduction to who and who. And take the bold step to engage. That's how people know you. After a while, I started getting invitations. And then I was part of my university, or my department. We were doing a public review. I was then as a student, I attended EIA public reviews, and now I also take my students. Then as a student, I was collecting contacts. Now when I take students, I collect contacts. When I go for sideways internship and visitation, I collect contacts of the various agencies. So now my social capital in terms of these stakeholders is wide. And then I am also engaged as a panelist on EIA. All of those things I collect network. So when I want to do something, I also hear information about what are the issues, what are the problems, and I identify my space and fit in. So you have to build your social capital. And it answers the question about researchers who should come to who. Both should come. I know my colleagues don't like this. You cannot sit down in the university and say the policymakers should come and meet you. It doesn't work that way. I tell my colleagues, it doesn't work that way. I am where I am today because I left the walls of the University of Lagos to engage. And I always tell my students, you cannot be working in the area of environment and be sitting in your house thinking that you want to solve environment problem. Environment problem is out there, is in the field. If you don't leave Lagos, you cannot know that, there's something happening in Niger Delta and all that. It's just news you'll be watching. What you're going to experience on the field is different from what you read on paper in journals. So you have to come out of your space. The same thing with the policymakers. Mr. Lasisi is someone that comes out of his space. He's not the only one in his ministry. Comes out of his space, engage people. So it's about coming down from our eye was we researchers, we feel that we are top there and all of that. The same thing to the policymakers, they feel that they should come to us. We must have the middle gap. So in terms of what are those initiatives that are bridging that gap, Eco-Environment Talk is one of it. After this presentation now, I will get contact for some people here from Mr. Lasisi. Some way or the other, we will have something to do. It's both ways. The same thing, the UPIN project, like I said, it was set up particularly for this. What we did in the UPIN project is that we set up what we call technical work groups and community of practice. In those work groups, we have researchers, we have policymakers, and then we have NGOs and CSOs. And I can tell you, Mr. Lasisi can attest to it. Some of the projects Mr. Lasisi is on now that I am part of were through that network. We facilitated engagements, secondments, where researchers will go to policymaking institutions, policymakers will come. The policymaker that came from Lagos State, Mrs. Suberu, after she came, the experience was so eye-opening for her. The researchers in Unilag, the experience was so eye-opening. They've done several projects after that. So those initiatives are beginning to open up. It wasn't so much there before. They're beginning to open up, but you also have to identify them. Because even when we put out calls out there, if you are not within the space, for instance, now you are not on social media, you're not on LinkedIn, you're not on Twitter, and you are doing environmental management, where are you going to get information? So it's about building your social capital. I'm shy, I don't talk to people. You have to learn for the purpose of what you want to achieve. You don't have to do everything, but be strategic, and you will get there. Let me stop there so I don't take too much time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I like how you actually answered the question, about 3-in-1 question, and you linked all of them together. My follow-up question for you would be, we know we have 3 tiers of government. However, we don't see the local governments participating in these conversations. From your experience, how do you think that we can begin to bridge this gap between state government and local government? Yes, state governments formulate the policies, but maybe why we've constantly seen this policy somersault because the real implementers are not even at the drawing board. What do you have to say to this, ma'am?
Well, I'm not sure which conversations you're referring to. Like you're talking, I don't know whether you mean this type of conversations or conversations at the points where the policies are being formulated.
Yes, at the point
for instance, where the policies are being formulated. Well, I'm not sure if I'm the one to answer that question because I'm not a policy maker. But from my own little experience, I know, for instance, when I am on EIA panels, for instance, The local government is brought on board, the representative of local government is brought on board, the stakeholder community, representative of the state government, and then the Federal Ministry of Environment. So at that point, they are actually engaged, because you're right, they are the ones that will implement the policies at the local level. So it means that line of information, right, needs to cascade, and they need to be engaged and involved. But there must also be the interest on the other side as well. Like I said, a lot of this thing, it burdens also on interest and passion. I mean, everyone can give an excuse for not being part of the process. You can say there's no money there. Who's going to pay my transport fare? And I've heard that, right? Who's going to pay my transport fare to go and do that work? For what end? I'm just being paid 20,000 or something like that. It's about you seeing the value that what you're going to engage in is going to add to your work and to the outcomes of your local community. Let's leave policy formulation, like I said, because I'm not a policy maker. I'm principally a researcher and an evidence broker. The current project I'm doing, I said I was working with some local governments, right? In the past few years, we've been working on drinking water assessment in slum communities. And this actually came about as a result of my involvement in a state project back then at the time of Governor Ambode on slum renewal, right? And we're working with local governments. We've worked in Makoko, Ajegunle, Ilaje, Bariga, and all of that, Shomolu. We work directly with the local government. And in fact, it was an eye-opener for me as well, because even for me, I didn't really realize their importance until I began to engage with them, right? And they also responded in like manner. So like I said, there must be that coming out of your space, and they too willing to come out and to contribute. Because even if they come around and they are part of the process, and they don't take the information back, or the action back, is also a challenge. Is also a challenge. So that's awareness raising, ensuring that everyone knows that they have a role to play, in achieving this environmental sustainability that we're talking about, is very, very important. And I must say that I have seen it demonstrated, at least at EIA assessment, EIA panel levels. In terms of the policy formulation process, that will now be Mr. Lassisi's port of call to answer that, since I don't work on that other side. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Mrs. Adinka, I'd like to ask you, what do you think are the key challenges in implementing evidence-based decision-making in environmental policy formulation?
Wow, that's a big question to be answered by an informed. But yes, I would, from my point of view, as a student, somebody still researching, I think some of the key challenges is maybe not being thorough enough in the evaluation process that might lead to unbiased acceptance of some of these policies. Then I also mentioned some things to my professor here, that policymakers are bound to provide solutions to this environmental problem. But how do we ascertain sorry to mention it, how do you ascertain the integrity of the members of that policy-making decision board? Are we sure of their interest about solving the problem? So when I mentioned that to my professor, he told me, yes, that is more of a social problem, not a scientific problem. And let's leave that to the social scientists to solve that problem. So I was like, yes, that problem might be very, very basic to solving the bigger problem, because if the people that are actually meant to solve this problem are not the right set of people to be there, that means we are not going to get anywhere with the problem we actually want to create a solution for. So I think one of the challenges, I'm not challenging any setup of any policymaker. I'm just saying that could be one of the challenges that we are having. Maybe we are having a square peg in a round hole. Maybe we're not having the right set of people to be there. Or maybe there are some underlying undertones to not accepting evidence-based research So from my own end, I think those are some of the challenges. Then coupled with the challenges that Dr. Shubamu itemized, the social challenges, the economic challenges. Okay, we know that if this policy is going to work, what effect is it going to have on the people? Will it be accepted by people? Is it going to affect their standard of living? If yes, okay, if it's going to affect their standard of living, what are the pushing effects that we are going to give the people so that we can implement this policy for environmental sustainability? So from my own end, I think those are the two challenges that I consider might be impeding some of these policies to achieve their purposes. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your insights. Dr. Omar, we know that Lagos State Science Research and Innovation Council is a body fully funded by the Lagos State government. However, lots of grants have been given for various research, but we're yet to see how these policies that have been funded by the state government, how they influence policies. From your own perspective, how do you think the council can ensure that these grants, the grants that are awarded, are research that will influence policies for the environment?
Yeah, I think with my own perspective on research, a research is either a yes or a no. So we shouldn't, in some cases where a researcher applied for maybe a research and the research was granted, and the council is expecting, okay, we want you to solve this problem for us, bring out this particular solution. And at the end of the research, that solution was not achieved. It doesn't mean that that money has gone to waste. It is also a solution in a way to telling the council that, okay, this problem cannot be solved in this particular way. I think grants should be given with an open mind. I'm not saying money should be wasted. It should be given with an open mind that let's just see how things are going to unfold, not being so rigid about it that you must come up with something. One of my professors was telling me that even if you do your research and you don't get a result, no result also means is also a result. It's also telling the body that, okay, this is like one of the 99 ways that this research could go wrong. And you have crossed that out. Another person that will be doing that research will say, okay, one has been crossed, remaining 98, let me try. So it should be given, grant should be given with an open mind. I know there are limited resources, but it should be given with an open mind to allow researchers to do their job, which I know that researchers in Nigeria are very, very skilled and smart to do what is put in their hands to do. So I know since they have there are indices to measure if the research was actually done, I think it's also a way to make the grants being accountable for. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, I wanted to get Dr. Shubamu's insights on the question as well.
Thank you. This is a very important question. And like I said, this is particularly relevant for applied research, which I think is mostly what LASRIC funds. One of the ways to achieve that there is, now it's like Adenika said, it's not every time that it will translate to a policy, right? But it can actually translate to some form of action. Now we talked about research to action projects, knowledge exchange projects. What research granting councils now do internationally, particularly, is that they now require some form of dissemination of your research results, outputs, and products. And one way is you can engage knowledge translation products, an evidence brief, a policy brief. And another critical way that you can have the research or output coming from such funded research making impact is engaging from the conceptual stage the relevant or target stakeholders, which includes the policymakers themselves. Am I saying they must always engage them in the research, especially maybe in the publication or in the research team so that they can collect funds? Not necessarily. They can be partners. So it's not that they're receiving funds, but they are helping to fine-tune the conceptual framework of the research so that it can feed into an intended output that the researcher originally wants. That's, I mean, the aim. So if your work, for instance, is on plastic pollution and management, and you are trying to do maybe a risk-based assessment or something about it, you want to find out from the relevant government agency, maybe in that target state or country, what's the status of this issue? What type of index do you need? Now we are advised that we should contextualize our research within SDGs and all of that. And within SDGs, we have indicators, we have targets. How does your research feed into or contribute to such indicators and targets? That's a question that you are required to answer, especially in international research proposals. The same thing, the government in Lagos State has environmental priorities. Are you aware about the team's agenda? Are you aware about the objectives and the priorities in the team's agenda? The portion that deals with the environment, how is your work feeding into it? And how are you going to make that product or the output of your work relevant to the implementing agencies or government ministries that need that output? That's why it's being funded. You know, so it's important that researchers are engaged to think this way. And one of the ways to engage them to think this way is to make it part of the research proposal requirement that you need to, you know, develop some form of knowledge product or dissemination where your research is relevant to a particular applied research or societal impact. So that's something to begin to think about, especially in Nigeria as well. It's something that is moving across board internationally. Nigeria also needs to think about it. I mean, in the paucity of funds, you want to ensure that the funds that is available and released is utilized judiciously, not just for publishing, but beyond publishing. You need to think, you know, broad spectrum, how this will feed into, how this will push the frontiers of solving a solution or at least creating some form of pathways. Yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for sharing your insights. Mr. Asisi wanted to make some interjections, so I give you the floor.
Now, I'll put you on the spot. There's a question from some of the participants online, and the question is, if you are made the special advisor to Lagos State, what do you think the three key priorities area the state can focus on when it comes to climate change?
Okay, so is this to me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. One of the first thing is the issue of air pollution. I'm involved in some projects, like I mentioned, some international, in fact, one that is funded by the US government on stakeholder engagement on air quality management in East and West Africa. And Lagos is one of the key states. And the reason why is that, I mean, we all know some of the drivers of climate change, most of the drivers, you know, carbon emissions, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, the polluting sources in Lagos, we know them, traffic, you know, generating sets and all of that. I have a student that is looking at the impact of outdoor air pollution in traffic hotspots in Lagos State. We have some research group in my university that we're putting air quality sensors to monitor air quality data in traffic hotspots in Lagos State. We are also looking at the effects of urban air quality on exercising in Lagos State. So in terms of that first thing, I will look at air pollution because of the strategic nature of Lagos, the population and the industries and so many things. Another thing that I would consider, and this may be biased, is on the issue of water quality. Water quality, both surface and drinking water. I mentioned earlier as well that I've been working on slum communities and looking at the environmental aspects, looking at their drinking water quality, and also assessing their environmental risk perception. Lagos has quite a number of slum communities, and it will amaze you about the populations of people who live in those slums. That is something that really touches my heart, and it's something that Lagos State needs to look into, and it's something that I would advise on if I were in that position. And it's not only for the purpose of solving the environmental problems from such areas as it talks to their impacts on water quality. It's also about looking at the opportunities that are available on utilizing the vast water resources that we have in Lagos State. I pride myself when I give presentations to say that Lagos State is the city of aquatic splendor. I've been to some countries like Vancouver where they have water, and you need to see what they do with the water on their coastlines. I love what is at Falomo, and I'm wondering whether we can do that across the coastlines across Lagos. But I also understand the socio-demographic dimensions. There are a lot of people, for instance, in Makoko, the Bariga area, who live there, and they've lived there for decades. So those are the kind of things that I would look into when it comes to water, the quality of water that is available, if any, in such places is something I would look at. Another thing, or the last thing I would look at for the third thing, is solid waste management. Lagos is trying, right? Lagos is trying, and I'm trying as much as possible not to be biased because I work with or partner with the Lagos state government. But that issue is still a perennial issue that needs to be addressed holistically. And it's something that I would advise on waste management. And the waste management is not just about plastics alone, but the consortium of solid waste itself is an issue for a population that we have in Lagos, and the seeming small landmass. Solid waste management is very critical. And it affects other sectors. Like I said, environment is cross-cutting. It affects tourism. It affects, people coming in. It affects quality of life. It affects health. So those key things would be something that I would focus on. Air pollution, outdoor and indoor, water quality, drinking water and surface water, and then waste management, solid waste management. Yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. Do you have any interventions? So at this point, I'd like to say that we have come to the end of the panel session. Thank you so much to Dr. Shugamo and Mr. Shewadeyinka for sharing your insights with us and our audience.
Thank you.
This is Eco-Environmental, the second webinar series of the Lagos Environment Lecture Series. Thank you to our audience for staying with us till this long. I hope it has been very insightful and knowledge-driven for you. For me, I'm seeing that data is a product. I never thought about it that way, so I want to say thank you to Dr. Sugar for bringing that to perspective, that data is actually a product, and if we begin to think about it as that, then maybe we can begin to understand how to utilize it properly. So I just want to say thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry
Thank you so much.
I forgot to acknowledge, I'm sorry, just 30 seconds. I forgot to show my acknowledgement slide. It's very important to acknowledge those that have supported my work in this area. And these are it. Like I said, Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, Federal Ministry of Environment, Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, my institution, and AFIDEB is the partner that I work with in training and capacity building. I just wanted to flag that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I, for sure, am definitely looking forward to more of your research coming out. I've been following your work, and I'd like to see more of the ones that you have in the pipeline, particularly the one with water, as you mentioned, and slum communities, because Lagos largely is an informal city and economy, so we can't take them out of the system, and it's essential to begin to think about inclusive, participatory policy formulation for the entire state, so that we can actually have a robust economy and that leverages the informal economy as well. So I'm really looking forward to reading from your research.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And congratulations on the second anniversary of Eco-Environment Talk. And thank you also to my fellow panelist, Mrs. Adeyinka Oluwase. Thank you.
Thank you so much, right? It was an honor to share the screen with Professor like you. So yeah, I look forward to doing more research with you as well. And thank God you are actually pioneering what I would also love to do in the nearest future. Talk to policymakers, bridge the gap. Yes, I already have a mentor. And thanks to Eco-Environment for bridging the gap between me and my Nigerian mentor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Pleasure is all ours. We're glad that the platform is doing what it was intended for. So to our panelists, to our audience, you know that we ran a quiz competition prior to this, ahead of the event. So we just want to announce the quiz winners. So these are the quiz winners, and you can see your individual gifts. Oluwakemi Omolara came first, and she's won herself a two-way runner gas cooker. Oluwatosin Ajibola came second, first runner-up, portable gas cylinder. And we don't have your name, but your email address is jamesmaryomolade@gmail.com, and this is the second runner-up, and you won yourself an electric iron. I just want to say thank you so much. We also had other consolation prize winners, and these are their names, and they've all won an environmental textbook. We hope that you find these useful to improve your environmental knowledge. And we have more winners. So we'll ask that our consolation, all our winners should please be in contact with EcoEnviroTalk on ecoenvirotalk@gmail.com. Please contact us via email, and we will work out the logistics for you to get your gifts. We also had other prize winners. Apologies about that. We also had other online prize winners, and the first person to log in was Mrs. Adebimpe Afinowi. So you have won yourself a gift. The other winner is Michael Caleb, Bisola Abike, and Joy Eharu. I'm sorry if I murdered your name. But yes, these are our winners. I'll just call out your names again. Please be in touch with us, and we'll send your gifts out. Mrs. Adebimpe Afinowi, Michael Caleb, Bisola Abike, and Joy Eharu. Please be in contact with us, and we'll work out the logistics of how you can get your gift. To all our viewers, we want to say thank you. To our distinguished panel members, we're really delighted that you have spent your day with us and joined us for these memorable events. We're glad that you decided to take time out of your busy schedules to be with us. We've come to the end of this webinar series, and please follow all our social media handles. On Instagram, we're at EcoEnviroTalk. On YouTube, we're also at EcoEnviroTalk, and you can watch all our videos and stay tuned with all our information. Okay, I have just gotten information that I should go over the winners again. So, Adebimpe Afinowi, Michael Caleb, Bisola Abike, Joy Eharu. These are winners, and these are for different criteria. You were either the first person to log in, or you answered one of the online questions correctly. We had some questions going on the YouTube chat box. So these are the winners that have emerged. As for those who won gifts from the quiz competition that we ran, just give me a second and I'll pull that up again. So once again, these are the winners for the quiz competition: Oluwakemi Omolara, Oluwatosin Ajibola, and jamesmaryomolade@gmail.com. We have consolation prize winners. So I'll just leave them on the screen for a while so that you can identify yourselves. I want to say thank you again to all our sponsors for the event: Techno Oil, bash these things well, and just similarly, I want to say a big thank you to you, to all our viewers. Please continue to follow us on Instagram and on YouTube. And watch out for all our upcoming events. We promise to keep producing delivering new products for environmental awareness and bridging the gap between human development and sustainable development. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. I just leave for Mr. Lasisi if he has any last words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tumbamo and President. We thank you for your contribution, and for the viewers, we thank you. My takeaway today will be this: having challenges with environmental data is one thing. However, having the ability to use the resources together is another thing. And in the co-environment talk, we will continue to find a way to bring the gap between researchers and academicians. And the takeaway basically today is probably next year, we will try and see if we can organize what for now we call Lagos Environment Conference. Lagos Environment Conference. Like I said, a lot of Nigerians outside the country are doing environmental research on Nigeria, on different aspects, and they are published outside. Maybe we can organize a conference where people can come into the country, or now we don't have to come into the country, we can do it online. Make presentation of research that are carried out on different media, whether here, water, or soil in Nigeria, or even on policy. Then we can now make it into a policy paper, submit to government. So next year we'll try and see how we work it out. We'll call it Lagos Environment Conference. Lagos Environment Conference. So this will be, we'll bring researchers who have been working in different aspects of Lagos. Yeah. So whether as a poster presentation or a paper presentation, let's bring. There are a lot of data research that has been carried out on Lagos, but we want to see how this data can come into policy. Presently, we have challenges. There are a lot of, in my opening statement, I said about policy somersaults and people who don't really get the feel. One thing that pains me about Lagos is the Lagos environmental sanitation, the monthly environmental sanitation exercise. Because some people get agitated, they go to court and they say we cannot do, Lagos state government cannot stop citizens, it's their human rights to do. But after stopping that single policy, we can see how degraded the state's environment is. And to me, it's a clarion call as a citizen. I'm not talking as a government official. I grew up in Lagos, I spent most of my life in Lagos, and you see how Lagos get degraded over the years. And it's something that is alarming. We need to win Lagos back. We need to get our city back. Lagos is not like this. We cannot just be living in slum. This is not Lagos we grew up to know. So there's a way if we have to bring the monthly environmental sanitation exercise back in one way or the other. It is not infringing on people. People cannot live if they are not healthy. We need healthy environment. Our children, the young generation cannot grow up and think this is how Lagos used to be. No, this is not how Lagos used to be. So this is my closing remark. Thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a lovely time spending the evening with you. Thank you all.
The conference is actually going to be a great idea, and I would love to be part of it.
We'll see how we work it out next year.
Great.
Thank you. Mr. Shogamu, thank you. Thank you everybody. Have a nice evening.
You're welcome. Congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am.